Good afternoon, everyone. If you ought to please stand. Creator and sustainer of all things and all people, you are the source of all wisdom and light. Enlighten our minds to receive your guidance so that you may lead us into true wisdom. May all that we say and do in the service of this county, whether as elected member or as officer, be in accordance with your will and for the good of your people. Amen. Evacuation procedure. In the event of having to evacuate the council chamber, would everyone leave by one of two exits at the rear of the chamber? Officers will be on hand to assist any disabled persons. Mobile phones. May I ask all members who have mobile phones with them to ensure that they are switched off so that they will not disturb this meeting. Agenda item number 1, Chairman's announcements, former county councillors. It is with great sadness that I report the deaths of former county councillors Mr. Ronnie Adams and Mr. Roger Blackmore. Mr. Adams was a member of the County Council from 1989 to 1997. He represented the Castle electoral division in Leicester City. Mr. Adams mainly served on the Arts, Libraries and Museums Committee, the Environment Committee and the Highways and Transportation Committee, where he was spokesman for a number of years. Mr. Blackmore was a member of the County Council from 1993 to 1997, and he represented the Western Park electoral division in Leicester City. Mr. Blackmore mainly served on the Arts, Libraries and Museums Committee, the Education Committee and a number of its subcommittees, and the Police Committee. Claire Lomas, MBE. I wish to convey my sincere condolences to the family of Claire Lomas, who tragically died last month in Jordan. Claire was paralysed from the chest down following a riding accident in 2007. However, she went on to raise over £1 million for charity. Claire made headlines around the world after completing the London Marathon in a robotic suit. I have a close connection with Claire's family, as both our families have farmed in Melton Mowbray for many, many generations. My thoughts and prayers are with Claire's immediate and extended family as they continue to mourn their loss. There will be a special service to celebrate Claire's life on Wednesday, the 2nd of October, and I will be attending to represent Leicestershire County Council. I invite the Council to stand in silent tribute to the memory of former County Councillors Mr. Adams, Mr. Blackmore and Claire Lomas. Thank you, members. County service. As a final reminder, I will be hosting the county service on Sunday the 6th of October at 3 p.m, St Mary's Church, Melton Mowbray. All members have been invited, and I do hope a number of you others will be able to come, to the ones who haven't replied already. Remembrance. On Monday the 11th of November, I will be leading the County Council's tributes at the annual Remembrance Service at Standeasy. As you will recall, at the last meeting I mentioned Armed Forces Week, which acknowledged all those serving in the Armed Forces, but it is equally important to reflect and remember all those service people who gave their lives for our country. I therefore hope as many members as possible will be able to join us. The Leicestershire Three Peaks Challenge. Now, I've got a typed script here to read out, and it turned out it's not totally accurate, so I will have to just change things as we go along, but I will start off with the script. Members may not be aware that the role of the chairman of the County Council also makes them patron of Charity Link. I had the great pleasure of taking part in Charity Link's Leicestershire Three Peaks Challenge to raise some money. It goes on to say the challenge is a 16-mile walk taken in Bardon Hill, Beacon Hill and Old John in Bradgate. The difference is, because if you take yourself back to last Sunday morning, the weather was absolutely nothing short of atrocious, no two ways about it. I think it's fair to say some would describe it as biblical. Mrs. Taylor kindly donated to the charity, and she said I would have some lovely views to look at and some beautiful countryside. I don't think I saw more than 50 metres on the whole morning. It was absolutely dreadful. Conditions were very slippery underfoot, and it was due to safety concerns. The walk was actually shortened from 16 miles to 10 miles. But we still did 3 peaks, but they weren't the 3 peaks mentioned. We did Old John twice. So it was a 10-mile walk. But the good news is, because of the generosity of people in this chamber and also friends and on Facebook, etc., I managed to raise £775 for Charity Link. And certainly all those members present here who gave to that charity, thank you very, very much. And also to others who may want to be included. It's not too late yet. Apparently Charity Link said, yes, last year they raised something like £7,000-8,000 before the event, but by the time it was finished, 15,000 was raised because people gave later on. So thank you again to everyone who helped me on that one. His Royal Highness, I forgot to add, here's my medal to show I did complete this course. So, yeah. I think I was the oldest one there, by the way, as well. So, hey-ho, that's the way it goes. His Royal Highness, the Duke of Gloucester, visit to Bosworth Battlefield and Heritage Centre. Last Tuesday, Mrs. Radford and I had the great pleasure of welcoming the Duke of Gloucester to Bosworth Battlefield to mark the 50th anniversary of the centre's opening by the Duke in 1974. It was only fitting that the Duke came back in 2024 and marked the occasion with the unveiling of a plaque. So we move on to what I always call the meeting now, agenda item number 2, the minutes. I move that the minutes of the meeting of the Council held on the 10th of July 2024, copies of which have been circulated to members, be taken as read, confirmed and signed. Mr. Shepherd?
Seconded, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item number 3, declarations of interest. I invite members who wish to do so to make declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda items for this meeting. I will move on to, I am aware that most members will have a relative or close associate who is affected by the notice of motion on winter fuel payments. However, the following members have informed me that they have a non-registrable interest in the notice of motion on winter fuel payments due to them or someone they live with having previously been in receipt of these payments or being due to receive a payment this winter. I'm going to read all names out now. Mr. Barclay, Mr. Bill, Mr. Bolter, Mrs. Broadley, Mr. Champion, Mr. Charlesworth, Mr. Coxon, Dr. Feltham, Mr. Gatoyore, Mr. Harrison, Mr. Hunt, Mr. King, Mrs. Newton, Mr. Orson, Mr. O'Shea, Mrs. Page, Mr. Pendleton, Mr. Phillimore, Mrs. Posnett, Mrs. Radford, Mr. Richardson, Mrs. Richardson, Mrs. Seaton, Mr. Shepherd and Mrs. Taylor. Are there any other declarations? Thank you very much, members. Agenda item number 4, questions asked under standing order 7, 1, 2 and 5. The questions and replies set out in the order paper will be taken as read and entered into the minutes. I have received no notice of supplementary questions. So item number 5, to receive position statements from members of the Cabinet. I now turn to the acting leader and invite her to make a statement. When the acting leader has finished her statement, I will invite members to speak. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand and I will then call you to speak. I will invite Mr Hunt and Mr Mullaney as leaders of the opposition to speak last before the leader's right to reply. Mrs Taylor.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, and congratulations on your 3 peaks, but completing it in such 3 peaks, but 1 twice. But congratulations on doing that in that awful weather. So I'm sure you're all aware of this, but I'm pleased just to officially announce publicly that the outcome of the recent inspection of Leicestershire Children's Services. So the inspection judged the overall effectiveness of our services as outstanding. This is a remarkable achievement and a reflection of the hard work and commitment of staff and leaders across the department, as well as the support from the County Council as a whole. Hinckley National Rail Freight Interchange. So members will no doubt already be aware that a written ministerial statement was issued on the 10th of September, extending the deadline for a decision. The planning inspector had recommended that the Secretary of State for Transport refuse the application. The Secretary of State has said that she is minded to agree with the recommendation and refuse. However, she has extended the deadline to allow further information to be submitted and analysed. The decision will now be issued on or before the 10th of March 2025. Detailed timings are set out in my position statement, and I'd like to take this opportunity to place on record my thanks to officers for their hard work in analysing the evidence and submitting the County Council's response to the application. The murder in Franklin Park, Ormston. Following the incident on September the 1st, 2024, and the tragic murder of Ben Coley, I would like to send my deepest condolences to his family and friends at this very difficult time. I also acknowledge that this remains a troubling and anxious time for the local community. We are working closely with the City Council and Blaby District Council to provide support for this area over this incredibly difficult time. VAT charge on private school fields. So members will also be aware of the plan to introduce VAT charges on private school fields from January 2025. There are an estimated 5,407 Leicestershire children who attend private schools. And whilst the impact of the change is yet to be understood, the impact for us could be twofold. Firstly, there is a risk of increased pressure on mid-term admissions requests if parents decide to withdraw their children from those private schools due to being unable to pay their fees. Secondly, there is a risk that children attending private schools with additional needs may not always have an EHCP, which could lead to increased requests for assessment or specialist places. All children with an EHCP are exempt from paying the additional VAT. The Offenders Early Release Scheme. As members are aware, under changes to the standard terminate sentence, a number of prisoners were released under end of custody supervised licence on Monday, the 9th of September. Across Leicestershire, there has been a strong partnership response from the Probation Service, the police and the County Council and a range of other agencies to ensure this release has gone smoothly and those prisoners who have returned to Leicestershire have been robustly managed and supported. On to devolution, another topic that we spoke about here constantly. So Sir Peter Salisbury and I have signed a joint letter to the government registering our interest in devolution and expressing hope that the proposed new devolution framework will not be as rigid as the current one. We are still awaiting a meeting with the Minister. We are also waiting for the new devolution framework to be published so we can see exactly what is in the government's offer. I will keep the Council updated when there is more information, but there is no point in the County Council doing any more work for now. It will be interesting to see if the Deputy Prime Minister's stated willingness to resolve issues which have stalled previous devolution deals negotiations can bring about the change and flexibility we need to have a good devolution deal for Leicestershire. And I'd just like to finish, Chairman, with a message from Nick. So the leader had wanted to attend the meeting today, but due to his treatment schedule, he's been prevented from doing so. But I would just like to say he's been very touched by all the cards, letters and best wishes he's received since he announced he had been diagnosed with cancer. He's continuing his treatment and is responding very well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs Taylor. I turn to Mr Bray for a question, please.
Yes, can I thank the Acting Leader for her statement? Just two points I'd like to pick up. Firstly, I just want to echo her comments to officers, or thanks to officers on the Hinckley Rail Freight interchange. It does affect my division, so I'm pleased that I think I described it in the press as being 3-0 up at half time, in that we are in a good position with the government. It is disappointing that the Secretary of State didn't just throw it straight out, both the current Secretary of State and the previous Secretary of State, of course, because it was on his desk for a month before the election. I wish they'd have just thrown it straight out and it would have settled the matter once and for all, but that doesn't detract from the amazing work that officers here and at both the district councils affected by this that are put in. So I just want to add my thanks. And just secondly on devolution, and again I echo what the Acting Leader has said. I hope the government is much more flexible. I would ask her, I would urge her if she would be willing to also engage with the districts, because the districts on a cross-party basis have always been willing to sit at tables to discuss the best possible devolution deal for the county, and I think it would be better for all concerned if all parties were round the table. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Bray. Mrs Wright.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. To echo really what Councillor Bray has just really said regarding the Hinckley Rail Freight, as the divisional member for Stony Stanton and Croft, where the rail freight is proposed to actually be located, I am thoroughly disappointed that an outright refusal has not been issued by the Secretary of State for Transport after the inspector recommended refusal. Fingers crossed that a mind to refuse by the Secretary doesn't become a mind to approve, as the developer Tritax has now been given an extension to provide more evidence. The applicant has had numerous opportunities throughout the long application process to submit the information required. Even at the public hearings, the applicant frequently missed deadlines and failed to provide vital information. The facts are the facts as highlighted in the inspector's report and cannot be changed. For example, one of my villages, Sapcote, the infrastructure is as it is and cannot be physically changed to accommodate heavy goods vehicles that cut through its centre. I would like to also thank our officers who attended the public hearings for their professional presentations and representations, and everyone from all our communities that are affected who have contributed to the consultations. It is vital, though, that we keep the pressure on even more than ever and do not become complacent. We need to respond if Tritax produce anything new, and we need to keep lobbying as our MPs will do. This will be within difficult timescales because it will be over the Christmas holidays. So I'm hoping for a positive outcome from the Secretary of State, and I'm hoping that the recommendation will be refused. Thank you, Mr Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs Wright. Mr Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. So, my division of Earl Shilton will also be significantly affected by the Hinckley Rail Freight Terminal. First, I'd just like to note, it's commonly recognised that all governments have a finite lifespan. They eventually run out of energy, ideas and discipline. Plus, people want to change. Sir Keir Starmer promised us a government of change. It appeared that we all forgot to ask, change for whom? It's a government for service. It's a service to whom? Service to the unions? Absolutely. Service to wealthy donors? You bet. Service to pensioners? No chance. And service to taxpayers? Not really. So in view of this, I have serious concerns about the statement from the Secretary of State delaying the decision on the Hinckley Rail Freight Terminal. If she was going to refuse it, why didn't she just come out and refuse it? My concern is we've got 6 months where they'll be looking for reasons to try and counter the planning inspectorate's reasons for recommending a refusal on this. So I'd urge everyone with an interest in this one not to be complacent, but continue the fight, because the battle is not yet won. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. King.
Thank you, Chairman, and I thank the leader for her statement. I agree, the awful situation with murder in Launceston, and also with the congratulations on the Ofsted report. But what I wanted to talk about in particular, two things, was one was about the VAT, 20% imposition of VAT on private independent schools, but also the removal of business rate exemptions on those that are registered as charities, something that hasn't really been talked about but will have a compounding effect. And the reason I raise this is, and I'm grateful for the numbers that you quote in your report, but actually a website I researched earlier said in Leicester and Leicestershire there are actually over 8,000 pupils, and as we know, a lot of children cross-boundary get sent to schools. And in my, not in my division, but in my area, Harborough, the largest private day school in Leicester and Leicestershire is Leicester Grammar School at Great Glen, and that has around 1,500 pupils. And in Market Harborough we have another school called Brookhouse College, which has around 200 pupils, and that's before we get around to the SEND providers. And so a lot of children come and go from around the surrounding areas, and the key thing to remember here is these schools also provide important facilities that are used by local community, like sports pitches, swimming pools, rooms to have events in, things like that. And they also importantly help deliver parental choice. Now I've got 3 not so young children now, and I exercised my parental choice a long time ago to send them to different state schools to the catchment area. I didn't go to a private school, I'll just make that point. And this choice, though, is very important in helping keep the state sector focused on delivering, in my view, on delivering better outcomes. So we talk about the impact locally, and we don't know what the impact is going to be because, and it's a shame Mrs Hack's not here, the MP for North West Leicestershire, and still county councillor as far as I remember, it's because the government forgot to, or hasn't chosen to post its impact assessment on what I consider to be a vicious act of class war. But if we look at the Independent Schools Council's 2018 Baines-Cutler report, which looked at this in detail, it says the dropout rate will range between 17 to 25%. Now, if we extrapolate that to Leicestershire, that's, or the over 8,000 pupils for Leicester and Leicestershire, that's potentially over 2,000 or more extra pupils that we might have to accommodate across the educational infrastructure. But unfortunately, they're not uniformly spread across that area. And as I and other colleagues in the Harbour area will know, Market Harbour in particular has very limited scope because of the physical constraints on sites to expand even for temporary classrooms at secondary level. So this is going to cause a lot of problems. It's already causing issues, as we've seen around the country, but it's also going to cause a lot of stress for the people who are mainly affected by this, which is young people, people who were affected by the COVID lockdown and shutdown. And here we are having another impact, admittedly not on all of them, but on a significant number. And to me, this is a bit of a very problematic issue. And finally, Chair, the other issue I wanted to talk about was about the devolution thing. And again, it is incredibly disappointing that after 3 years of work or more, that we still have got, unfortunately, the city mayor being the roadblock to actually getting anywhere with this. We had an opportunity to join the East Midlands deal. They don't want us anymore because the Labour mayor's made that clear they're not interested in adding us to it, and the city mayor doesn't seem to want to do that either. So I do wonder what the Labour Party locally is actually doing about this to try and sort this out, Chair. But, you know, maybe we'll find out eventually. But in the meantime, Leicestershire seems to me to have been relegated to the bottom. And if this was a football analogy, we're in the 4th division, whilst other places are in the Premier League. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. King. Are there any other questions at all? before I invite Mr Hunt to speak. Mr Hunt.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Acting Leader, for the statement you've made. I think we're all in agreement of and pride in the result we've got from Ofsted, and we discussed it in our scrutiny committee and elsewhere, and the officers have really pulled out all the stops to produce this result, and it is most welcome. Moving swiftly on from the Hinckley situation, which I thoroughly understand. The issue of VAT on private schools has been discussed in the general election, and I don't think it's a great idea to rerun the general election in this forum. But I would say that the result of the extra cash that the government is going to get will be 6,500 extra teachers in the maintained sector, and that shouldn't be forgotten. As far as the early release scheme is concerned, again, we don't want to run the general election again, but there is a problem with that £22 billion gap. But more than that, we'll discuss that later, more than that, we had a problem. We do have a problem because the government sat on the decision to build extra prisons. They could see extra prisons were going to be needed, and the first obligation of a government is to keep safe the community. And unfortunately, this early release has been forced upon the government because of the failure to keep up with the prison numbers. And finally, on a perhaps happier note, I'm pleased that the acting leader has picked up the devolution question with the government and with the city and I believe with the leader of Rutland, and we will get a satisfactory conclusion on that because we've got some very big issues of economic development, in particular in the central area of what would be the East Midlands, around the East Midlands Gateway, and in northwest Leicestershire and in Charnwood, and of course in Nottingham and Derbyshire. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Hunt. Mr Mullaney.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, and thank you to the Acting Leader for her statement. And I join in congratulating the staff in Children's Services for the progress they've made in achieving the outstanding rating. I'm sure we all welcome that. And I add my condolences to the family and friends of Bim Coley for the awful murder that took place. On the Hinckley National Rail Freight Interchange, myself and the local council in Hinckley and Bosworth have long objected to the rail freight plan due to what we see as the effects on local roads and the blighting of Burbage Common. So I welcome the planning inspector's advice for rejecting the plan. It's a shame that it wasn't turned down by either the previous Secretary of State or the current Secretary of State immediately, but we hope that when the decision is made in the spring that it will rightly be to throw out this project, which is very flawed and will not help the local area. In terms of devolution deal, obviously we know how unfairly Leicestershire has been treated for many years by governments in terms of the lack of funding, so any opportunities we should be trying to take up, and hopefully something comes of this, because for far too long our county has been put at the back of the queue and treated unfairly.
Thank you very much, Mr Mullaney. Mrs Taylor.
Thank you, and thank you for all your congratulation messages on the Children's Services, something I'm incredibly proud of and will be living on for the rest of my life, the achievement that we've done. I think just on the devolution with Mr Bray, I take your point about the districts, and yes, I agree with you, but we've spent 3 long years dealing with this and got absolutely nowhere. So if we'd included the districts right at the beginning, you would have also had 3 long years of getting nowhere. So I'm sure when the time is right and we actually get something on paper and some kind of direction about where we're heading, that is the time to speak to the district. So I take your point, but I think it's too early yet because there's nothing coming forward yet. Until we get that, there's no point us having any conversations. Just on Maggie, the Royal Freight, I know she's campaigned long and hard for this, so I appreciate all the work she's done, and I think we all share the disappointment with the lack of decision, and it would have been good to get that decision across the line and got on with everything. But they have got till the 10th of December to submit some more information. As said, they've had plenty of time to submit that information prior to the decision going to the planning inspector. So we'll see what they come back with, but we will be responding once that additional information comes through. Just on the VAT on private schools, so not all the children in our private schools are actually Leicestershire children, so if parents do pull them out, they're not necessarily going to be coming into our schools. So it's really difficult to see how many children might fall out of those private schools, or parents might pull them. So the figure I quoted was just for Leicestershire. The figure you're quoting is for Leicester and Leicestershire. So I'm just concerned about our Leicestershire schools. So it is going to be really difficult. And I think the main issue that Councillor King to pick up is that if children are pulled out of private schools by their parents, if they're in places where we have very small amounts of spare places, they're going to be left with no school place. So I would urge parents to think very carefully before they decide to pull their children from any private school places that they've already got, and to check that there are school places in their area if that's the way they're going to go. Otherwise, we could end up with lots of children without school places, and they'll end up being across county and not in areas next to their friends or their peers. So we do need to be really careful how we manage that. But my main concern is children with the HCPs that are in these private schools, because the parents choose to put their children in there rather than having them go through the HCP system. We all know the incredible pressure we're under for HCPs in the council and the pressures that we've got on our budgets. So having lots of applications all at once for HCPs is just going to, you know, we're in a really difficult place with that. So we tread carefully, we'll watch what happens and see. We'll prepare as much as we can, but it's a demand-led budget and we're really difficult to see what's going to happen. Just on devolution, I think if you look at the map now, we're in a bit of a devolution desert. Everywhere around has had devolution deals, and yeah, we are being left behind, but not because of us. So, you know, I am in conversation with Sir Peter Salisbury. I'm sure he's getting pressure from his group. We need to get this over the line for us. So I will continue working with Sir Peter Salisbury and the leader of Rutland to see what we can get for Leicestershire. But, you know, we've been a long time doing this, and it gets tiring when you're not getting any response. But I will keep trying, and I will work the districts when the time is right. And just, Max, on the VAT on the private schools, you quoted there 6,500 new teachers being created. So that's less than one per school. So I'm not sure how much of an effect that's going to have, to be honest, in the state schools. You know, having half a teacher is not going to really do much for us. So I don't understand how that's going to help us. And the prison release, yeah, but planning departments refused lots of new prisons, some of them Labour councillors, some of them Conservative, across all parties. So getting things through planning department is not easy. So, you know, you can't put the blame all on the government. Planning departments in local authorities have refused to have prisons built in their areas. So, you know, it's down to all of us to make sure that we do have those prison places that we need, so we're not getting offenders released before they've finished their sentences. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Taylor. Moving over to the page, it is the position statement from the acting leader of the council, which we've done that. Yeah, sorry. Moved over the page too quick. Lead member for Highways, Transport and Flooding. I will now invite lead member for Highways, Transport and Flooding to make his position statement. Again, if you wish to speak, please raise your hands. I will then call you to speak. If Mr Hunt or Mr Mullaney wish to speak, I will call them last before the lead members there to reply. Mr O'Shea.
Thank you, Chair. Everyone will be aware of the serious flooding in Leicestershire due to the heavy rainfall on the 21st and the 22nd of September. On Saturday afternoon, the 21st of September, calls started to the Highways Duty Officer regarding flooding and adverse weather, and it continued throughout the weekend with over 200 calls being received. Many of the usual flood locations in the north of the county were affected initially, and roads closed included Slash Lane near Sileby, Mount Sorrel Lane, Sileby, Sileby Road, Mount Sorrel, Churchill Road, Thurmaston under the railway bridge. In addition, Market Harbour Town Centre experienced flooding. It is understood the surface water sewer manhole surcharged at the top of the town near to Bowden Lane. That just proves that the gullies obviously were taking the water, but it could not cope with the sheer incessant amount of water that was being dropped over Leicestershire at that particular time. And the town flooded between 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. on Saturday. Council officers met with Harborough District Council and Anglian Water on Monday the 23rd of September to discuss the situation further. Since the weekend, further roads have been affected by rising water levels. These include Mythe Lane, Witherley, Countersthorpe Road, Wigston, Crow Mills, Leicester Road, Blaby. Highways operational gangs will continue to monitor locations affected by the adverse weather to understand the status and keep them safe as well as clear. They want to make sure that the detritus left by the flood water is cleared off the road so that doesn't affect us again. It's understood that a number of commercial properties were initially flooded in Market Harbour Town Centre on Saturday the 21st of September. There have been reports of 2 schools in Harborough District being internally flooded, as well as commercial property in Blaby District. Details relating to all above are still being collated. As the lead local flood authority, the Council's flooding team will continue to collate reports of internal property flooding, and as such, instances should be reported to flooding@laics.gov.uk. I want to put on record my thanks to the officers over the weekend for the work that they did in trying to prevent places flooding. I personally, in my ward, had in Groby, where we're doing a flood alleviation work, they'd actually put extra tanks, holding tanks in the ground. That still flooded, but it did not flood the houses in that particular area. The top of Leicester Road and Ratby Road, we saw that the deli, the Stanford Arms public house and the old butcher's that is now a residential place, that was affected by water, and the flood alleviation works is partly done in that area. Over the weekend, we received so many calls, but the weather I've not seen, I've got to be honest with you, I've not seen weather like that for many, many years. And the system could not cope with the amount of water that was being dropped on it. So I want to put on my record that our officers did a fantastic job, and I want to thank all the members that went out to protect their residents and try to help them during that period. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Shea. I would just like to add actually to what you just said there, Mr. O'Shea. When I was walking somewhere, I presume in Mrs. Taylor's division, it was up a slope, and for those of you who know me well, I do a huge amount of walking on highways, and I've got this horrible habit of looking in the gullies to see if they're clear or not. Anyway, I was walking up there somewhere in Mrs. Taylor's division, and it was about 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. The rain was, like I said earlier, biblical. Every single gully was working on both sides of the road, but it just could not cope. The system could not cope. But anyway, Mr. Galton sitting very patiently to wait to get a question and make a statement.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and thank the lead member for his timely statement. I guess it's not possible for everywhere that experienced flooding to be on the list, but in case of in my area in Fernby, the problem isn't the gullies, as many. The problem is the old combined foul stormwater sewer, because whilst our gully, the water from our gullies goes into it, that, as we know, belongs to the water company, to Severn Trent. So what you get, and this happened three times this year, is foul sewerage spewing out of the manhole covers onto the public highway. And in my case, it's very near a brook, which is classed as a main river. And then the sewage gets into the main river, and you've got a sewage discharge situation as well. So I just wondered where it's clearly not our responsibility. We've done our bit, we've kept the gullies clean and so on. And then the county council's come along and, in the past and put larger gullies in, the more modern type, where the pots hold more water to try and at least hold the water back. But where you've clearly got a problem with old Victorian combined foul and stormwater sewers that are just not up to it anymore, hundreds of houses being built, they're all going into the system as well, not the stormwater, but the foul is still going into the system, putting more strain on it. So my solution wasn't the county council, I thought it was to get hold of Severn Trent. Will you try and engage with Severn Trent as an elected member where you're not actually reporting your house? Because the assumption is you're trying to report a flooding problem at your residence. They want your date of birth, they want your address. Well, that's not relevant because it's a mile down the road from where I live. It is incredibly difficult to engage with them. Eventually, I did engage with them by sending them a video, and because the foul was going into the main river, they were out within 2 hours. Problem is, the water had subsided by then, and the covers weren't lifting. Now, I know that Mr O'Shea's had personal experience of dealing with Severn Trent when the water got into the gas systems, and I know that there was some criticism then. So what I'm really saying, and I know that some of our officers who, when they understand the problem, then try and engage with Severn Trent, and they're not getting a very good response or no response either. So the message I want to get through this afternoon is whether we're doing it as the lead local flood authority or whatever, where the problem is clearly one of the water companies, we need to talk to them. We need to get them to understand the problem. And frankly, we need to encourage them to come up with some capital schemes to solve some of these problems. And I just wondered if he had any ideas how we might improve that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Galton. Mr King.
Thank you, Chairman, and I'd like to thank the Cabinet Member, Mr O'Shea, for his position statement regarding the flooding. So, as the Division Member for Market Harbour West and Foxton, actually I was in Market Harbour on Saturday afternoon when it was rain. It was a lot of rain. Although I didn't actually, I missed the particular area where this was particularly, where it was bad. So I'm grateful for the clarification of what's actually led to that happening, which is the manhole coming up. But also like to thank all the staff that have been involved in coping with the reports and the aftermath at the time. Some of the previous flood prevention works that have been undertaken seem to have functioned well and seem to have stopped the position actually getting worse. But as you say, the volume of rain did overwhelm some of the measures in Market Harbour and the surrounding areas. But there are a couple of queries I've got. So first of all, in your position statement, you say that the team are collating information. I know that takes some time from previous incidents, but will there be an opportunity for a full member kind of debriefing, information sharing exercise at some point in the future once all that information has been collated? The second thing is, if there are to be flooding drop-in sessions, there were some after Storm Heck, but there wasn't actually one held in the south of the county. It was in, I think, Melton and Blaby, I think. So there wasn't one actually in the harbour locality. So I think if there is going to be these drop-in, how to deal with things in a flood situation or whatever, there needs to be one in our locality if that can be done. I understand the challenges that there are two different water companies, picking up Mr Galton's point. There are two different water companies involved, and we're in Anglian Water, whereas I think further north it is Severn Trent. And finally, I understand there is a surface water review that's been carried out since 2021 incidents, and that's still underway for the Market Harbour locality, but there doesn't seem to be any update. I'm just wondering if the lead member can encourage officers to move that along perhaps a bit quicker than they were otherwise were thinking of doing, given the situation that has occurred in the last week or so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr King. Mr Richardson.
Thank you, Chair, and could I thank Councillor O'Shea for his statement. I think he's absolutely right. The weather was absolutely biblical, and I actually think in some ways the system stood up to it pretty well, which I think is evidence that we've done our bit as a council to try and keep as you say, drains and gullies clear. Mine's a very simple question, Oz, and you may not know the answer, but I'd appreciate if you could let me know in due course. I was surprised this morning when I visited a local company that they had in fact been flooded on a local industrial estate over the weekend. My question is quite simply, I know there is a grant available to private residences, which is paid through the council. Is there a similar grant for commercial customers? Because it was just I promised I'd find out for them, and it seemed an appropriate point to ask today if there was any grant they could claim. They appreciate they would have to pay up front and claim it back, but just if there was anything available.
Thank you very much, Mr. Richardson. Mrs. Jordan.
I would like to thank the Highways Department for all that they've done over the recent floods. My division has had a particular problem. Under the bridge in Blaby has been flooded for the whole weekend. It's caused loads of misery for all the local people in the cars in the area. It's been really difficult to get in or out of Blaby. I have contacted Severn Trent, and this is an ongoing thing that happens every year. It's always in the same locations, and I was just wondering if Highways could do anything. There was any way that any meetings could be arranged or something could be done to prevent this happening in the future. I know with climate change, this is severe weather problems like this are likely to happen a lot of times in the future, and I just wondered, you know, what was the way forward, how we could prevent this misery happening, you know, so often in my location. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Jordan. Mrs. Radford.
So I've got a B in front of my name. It's all right, I've got a B in front of my name. Right, congratulations on your Three Peaks walk. I do sympathise with you. Guess who organised the barbecue that weekend? But my great-grandchildren thought it was brilliant with all the rain and the thunder and lightning. Anyway, to go back to the topic, I find that the problem is, and when I was on the borough, was when the big planning applications come through and you go through, and Severn Trent said there's no problems with the existing drainage. But all the residents who lived around there know there are problems with the drainage because, like one of the councillors over there said, it's the old system. So I don't know how we can overcome that, but really it's the old system that can't cope with a lot of these new developments either. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Radford. Mr. Frisbee.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to formally record that the Environment and Climate Change Committee do invite Severn Trent and the Environment Agency to attend our meetings. So we're not operating entirely in a silo, that we do have a level of communication to them. And if members would like us to petition anything further from front of them, we'd welcome to hear from them as well. So we are actually in continuous dialogues with them. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mrs. Seaton.
Thank you, Chair. My residents in Thurmaston will expect me to bring the repeated flooding onto Churchill Rail Bridge to the attention of Highways via this council meeting today. The bridge flooding does not endanger livelihoods, thank goodness, and it doesn't destroy any properties. So that our residents will understand prioritising is essential and directing services where the flooding is more than an inconvenience should be prioritised. However, the bridge was flooded and impassable for 9 days prior to last weekend's biblical downpour and could have been dealt with before that weekend. The scheme has been costed. It's been planned and it is there on paper. This has been going on for 25 years as far as I'm aware, and that is the amount of time I've lived in Thurmaston. And it is something that does need to be sorted out for my residents. We are lucky, it is an inconvenience, and we are not destroying any, as I say, livelihoods or houses, but it is something that needs to be sorted out with Network Rail, with Severn Trent, with the Environmental Agency, and with Canals and River Trust, because it is a complete culvert going through the Dales all the way down to the river, and it needs to be done in coordination with all of those services to be sorted out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Seaton. I'm not aware of any other questioners, and if they're not, I will invite Mr. Hunt to speak. Mr. Hunt has declined. Mr. Mullaney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the lead member for the report. On Sunday morning, I was contacted by residents on Barwell Lane in Hinckley, who live on the corner of Ashby Road and Barwell Lane, which is an area which does suffer from flooding, and I did report this to the Highways team, and it was very quickly dealt with despite the high levels of demand. So I will also pass on my appreciation for the work that was done over the weekend.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mullaney. Mr. O'Shea, right to reply.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, Mr. Galton, if you need my help in moving anything, I will certainly give you that. I've experienced problems in my ward. It's took me the best part of 6 or 7 years to actually get £2 million worth of flood alleviation work from Severn Trent. So it is a battle with Severn Trent to get this done, but it's a matter of working with Severn Trent. And if you contact me afterwards, I will speak with you, and we'll look at officers if we can liaise with Severn Trent with you, and we'll have a meeting. So I'll take that as gospel. Now, moving on, we have had problems all over the county. As I say, this was an unexpected downpour that we had, and it was of biblical proportions. You know, my street actually flooded for the best part of 40 minutes before the drains took it away again. So it was just the sheer incessant water that came down. However, I don't particularly know, Terry, whether we do give grants to commercial places, but I will find out for you. In relation to Thermiston, I know that officers are working on a system there. It's just taking time. You appreciate that, you know, things, getting all those agencies together does take time. And I know that Highways are working on that, and you've raised it 2 or 3 times, and we are looking at it. It's not that we've forgot about it, and I'll get officers to contact you for an update. Mrs. Jordan, you say that it floods once a year. How often does it flood? Yeah. Have you contacted any of the other agencies involved? If you send me an email me, and then I'll get it looked at. All right? Yeah. If just email me the problems, and I will look at it for you. Okay? If I've missed anybody, I apologise. Mr. Hunt? No. Yeah. If I've missed anybody, I apologise.
Not for Mr. Hunt didn't say anything.
Okay. Okay. Take care.
Thank you very much. Moving on to consider reports of the Cabinet Scrutiny Commission, Scrutiny Committees and other bodies. Agenda item number 6, report to Cabinet, page 17 to 76. Principal Speaker, move the motion. Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Mullaney. Mrs. Posnett. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm presenting the Equalities, Diversity and Inclusion Strategy to you today. I'm pleased to present it. It's taken a considerable amount of work. The officers have taken the strategy can't get my words out now, has taken the strategy to be reviewed by scrutiny. It's also been to the Cabinet, and they have adapted it to fit in with the requests that were given to them. And the Council has the strategy will be running from 2024 till 2028, but obviously it will remain under constant review during those periods for any changes that may occur. The Council has a proud record of working in this area. The last residents' survey found that 93% of people agree that Leicestershire is a place where people of diverse backgrounds get on well. 82% agree that the Council treats all types of people fairly in the latest workforce survey. 92.5% agreed that the Council is committed to equality, diversity and inclusion. The strategy has been shaped by consultation and engagement with communities, residents and staff. There was also engagement with the Council Scrutiny Commission. We recognise that this is a continuous journey. The strategy will be delivered through an action plan with regular reporting and review. We are conscious how national and sometimes international events can impact on community cohesion. The Council remains committed to the vision of Leicestershire as a safe and welcoming place for all communities, that our services will be fair and accessible, and that all staff will be treated with dignity and respect. I look forward to working with the communities, the staff members and the staff of the Council to help make this a reality. I formally move this motion.
Mrs Richardson, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to second this statement, this report. I think the overall results from the survey are really good, and we should be proud of our achievements. I think we have an inclusive strategy and action plan here, and it's important to recognise that there is always room for improvement and we mustn't be complacent, but I'm very happy to second this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Richardson. Mrs Newton.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to welcome the Equality and Diversity Strategy. I think it's important that all councils have such a strategy in place which takes note of the many and varied ways in which inequalities can define a person's life chances. Perhaps there's more that we can do to get closer to and listen to those communities who do not usually connect with councils and with services. I wonder also if we need to do more to use the equalities information that we have in order to help us plan our future services to meet the diverse needs of our communities. Local government has a powerful impact on all our lives, and it is essential that it works well, equally well for men and women. This is important when one considers that only 35% of councillors in England and Wales are women. That comes from Facet Research Centre. Maybe councillors should commit to more gender-balanced leadership in their cabinet or committee chairs post, and eradicate girls' jobs and boys' jobs in those roles. More than 100 years after women first won the right to vote, over 90% of councils in England and Wales are male-dominated, with little progress in women's representation in local government. This is surely a matter of concern. It is somewhat meaningless, not to say hypocritical, to talk about equalities in other areas while such a situation exists in councils. Facet Research has also found that sexism is common in local government, with a third of female councillors having experienced sexist comments from their Council College. Clearly there really is more work to be done here. Consequently, I would like to support the motion regarding the need for more inclusive and balanced practices everywhere. Finally, I also fully support the right of staff to speak out on these and other related issues without fear of consequences. Surely the bottom line should be we should all endeavour to treat others as we would like ourselves to be treated. Thank you, Chair, and I support the policy.
Thank you very much. Mr. Parton.
In the Adults and Communities Department, you have the Adult Learning Service, and Mrs. Radford gave me the ultimate pleasure of leading that service politically. And I looked into the equality, diversion and inclusion work that department does, how to teach people of all backgrounds in Leicestershire. But it goes deeper than that. And so I looked into some of the training that they give the staff. And I'll share with you an example of the efforts the council goes to ensure that nobody is left behind in adult education. And you can then extend that to how the council looks after their residents and people of Leicestershire. So the challenge some of the trainee staff were given was, we'll give you 3 people. How will you ensure that they receive the best education from this county council? A 32-year-old single mother with mental health issues. Person 2, a 19-year-old lady with dyslexia, but who lives with a disabled grandmother and has to care for her virtually full time. A 25-year-old autistic man who has to work nights in order to support himself in his education. And you have to go through those 3 cases and think, how will I get that person through their education? But more so, how will I support that person to improve their life chances? How can we help the disabled grandmother more? How can we take the pressure off the 19-year-old? It isn't just a case of getting people through this qualification. And this is all through the equality, diversion and inclusion strategy. So when you look into this strategy, it proves itself in so many facets. And here's a good example of the depths that this council and its staff goes to ensure that absolutely nobody is left behind.
Thank you. I'm not aware of any other questioners. Mrs. Posnett, would you like to come back?
Yes, please. First of all, I'd like to thank Ted for his comments. They're very welcome, and I know what he says is right. We do work really, really hard. I'd also like to thank Mrs. Newton for the comments that she's made and assure her that we do go out and meet communities. We also have networking sessions for people that don't want to meet face-to-face, or it's just easier for everybody to get together that way. So we're actively looking at groups where we can work with and help them perhaps improve their situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Posnett. We will now take a vote on the motion. I ask you all to raise your hands, please. All in favour? I believe that's unanimous, but are there any against for the record? And any abstentions? No. Thank you very much. I will now ask Mr. Shepherd, please, just to step forward. He's going to take over from this point now. Thank you very much.
And we'll take you through the rest of the... Do you want to call an adjournment for 5 minutes and I'll take you through the rest of the pack, or are you happy to carry on?
Happy to carry on, I think, yes.
Lovely. So we're up to...
Well, members, I'm sure we all wish the chairman a very speedy recovery to full health. He's not feeling very well, has to leave the chamber, so I've been asked to stand in for the remainder of the meeting. So we come to agenda item number 7, the report of the Constitution Committee, the appointment of independent persons, and I call on Mrs. Taylor to move.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I move the appointment of the independent persons that Richard Goff, Gordon Grimes, Surinder Sharman, Pamela Roberts, John Pilgrim and Kimberly Kingsley be appointed to serve as independent persons for a term of 4 years ending on the 30th of September 2028. I'd like to welcome the appointment of the 6 independent persons to support our standards process, 4 of whom have served in this role previously. Leicestershire County Council has always maintained high standards of conduct, and I'm pleased that we are supported by so many experienced independent persons. It was pleasing to see so many high calibre applicants for the role, which is voluntary, and I thank them for putting themselves forward. I would also like to put on record our thanks to the 2 of our previous independent persons, Miss Herring and Miss Katocha, for the invaluable work and support they have provided over the last 4 years, and I wish them well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Poland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I second this motion.
I'm now looking for any indications of speakers. I can see none, so we can proceed, I think, to the vote. Could you please raise your hand if you are in favour?
Is everyone, Chairman?
Thank you. If you're against? Any abstentions? Thank you. That motion is clearly carried. We now move to agenda item number 8, the report of the Corporate Governance Committee, and I call on Mr. Barclay to move the motion.
Thank you, Chair. As recommended by the Corporate Governance Committee, I propose the amendments to the financial procedure rules set out in Appendix A to this report be approved.
Thank you. Mr. Richardson, please.
Second, Mr. Chairman.
Now, I think it is Mr. Bolter to speak next. No, that's not correct. Other speakers first, do we have?
No, I don't think anyone wants to speak.
I better just check. Are there any other speakers before Mr. Bolter speaks? No, it seems not. Mr. Bolter, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it was an interesting interview session we had with them. They stood up very well to the cross-examination we gave them, and I think they'd be very good for the authority. Couldn't find faults with any of them, so I'm very, very pleased to support the recommendation.
Please, Mr. Bolter, you may be straying onto our last item.
Independent persons?
We can proceed to the vote, so could you please raise your hand if you're in favour? Thank you. Again, if you're against, please raise your hand. Thank you. Any abstentions? None? Thank you. We now move to agenda item number 9, appointment of Cabinet Support Members. I call on Mrs. Taylor to move.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that Mr. Barry Champion, County Councillor, be appointed as Cabinet Support Member until the next annual meeting of the County Council as provided for in Article 7 of the Council's Constitution.
Mr. Poland, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I second that motion.
Are there any other speakers? Mr. Bray.
Well, just the usual comment, Mr. Chairman. We're not against the individual per se. We're just against the post, so we won't be supporting it.
Thank you. Other speakers? No, it seems not. So we move to the vote. Could you please raise your hand if you are in favour of the motion? Thank you. And again, if you're against, please raise your hand. Thank you. Any abstentions? No? Thank you. We now move to agenda item number 10 on A, winter fuel payments, and I call on Mr. Mullaney, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I pass on my group's best wishes to the Chairman and hope he's recovered soon. This motion calls on the government to think again and drop its plans to remove the winter fuel payments from the vast majority of pensioners here in Leicestershire. Speaking to residents locally, it's clear that many are disappointed, angry and anxious about the government's current proposals for winter fuel payments. Under the plans, 129,000 pensioners here in Leicestershire would lose their winter fuel payments. This means that a staggering 92.5% of pensioners in Leicestershire who currently receive the winter fuel payments will no longer do so. Do we really believe that over 92% of pensioners locally are well off and won't be hit adversely by losing this payment? Do we really believe that many of them won't face stress and anxiety at the loss of what is for many of them vital extra income to keep their homes warm in winter? Now, government says the poorest pensioners will still be provided for by it applying to people on pension credit. But the reality is that of those eligible for pension credit, 4 in 10 don't even claim the pension credit. That's 880,000 pensioners across the country who are entitled to pension credit who don't claim it. That includes thousands of pensioners here in Leicestershire, and they will obviously now be doubly worse off in that they won't be getting the pension credit and therefore they won't be eligible for the winter fuel payments if the government persists with its proposal. And I would urge all pensioners who think they might be entitled to the pension credit to please apply for it. Now, I understand that the government faced a huge economic challenge left to them by the previous Conservative government and that they are having to look at difficult decisions as a consequence. And I understand that the idea of a universal winter fuel payment was criticised as some very wealthy people who didn't need it got it. But I have to say that any change that excludes 92.5% of pensioners here in Leicestershire, as the current plans currently do, draws the lines far too narrowly and will certainly exclude many pensioners who would still need to receive the winter fuel payments. And with fuel costs set to rise again in October, many pensioners may well face the appalling choice of having to choose between eating and heating their homes. So the government must rethink its plan to remove winter fuel payments from the vast majority of pensioners here in Leicestershire. And I urge councillors today to support this motion and send a message to the government, as they've had from many other organisations and councils, that they need to think again, drop these plans and come back with a proposal that ensures that all those pensioners locally who need the winter fuel payment this winter will continue to receive it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mullaney. I call on Mrs. Taylor.
I'm very happy to second the motion and I will reserve my right to speak.
I have a list of those who've shown they wish to speak here. So we start with Mr. Smith, please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Chairman. Well, the winter fuel payment, I'd like to thank the member opposite for bringing this motion here today. You can't turn on the TV or social media without actually seeing winter fuel payment being across the board. But I think it's really important that we understand that these are not just pensioners. These are our parents, our mums, our dads, our grandparents, our grannies and granddads. Like my granny Sheila, who's 92, and she's just, through a private pension, just a few pounds over a month, enabled to claim pension credit. And my constituent Barry, who's 86, an RAF veteran, he's recently lost his wife of 62 years. He's now facing the fact with his RAF pension that he's no longer going to be able to claim pension credit. So he's going to be losing that winter fuel payment. That in addition to the 10% extra in the increase in energy costs and the potential now of him losing his single living rates relief as well. So this affects real people. This is not just pensioners. Now, of course, the Labour Party and perhaps some of their members in this room today keep using this excuse of the £22 billion black hole that they fabricated from somewhere. But I've got news for you. It's not washing with the public. Every time, you've heard it in this chamber today, every time it's mentioned, people laugh or groan because it's just not washing. Especially when you consider that half of that money, or almost half, is down to the fact that you've given inflation-busting pay rises to train drivers and junior doctors. Now, on one hand, though, you're taking, and then on the other hand, you're coming up with policies that are given, such as the breakfast clubs for all primary school children. Now, had two boys, they're both now grown up, but I was happy to pay for their breakfast. I was quite, capable of doing that and happy to do so. But the Labour government, in their wisdom, are now going to be giving free breakfast for all school children. How they're actually going to staff that, that's another question. Perhaps my granny Sheila could come out of retirement. At least then, she, obviously she'd then be fed and watered and warm as well. But it's a shame that the member for Braunson's place is empty today. Obviously, she's too busy to attend being at conference. I'd love to explain today to this chamber why she made the decision in Parliament to vote against the benefit and the welfare of her residents in North West Leicestershire. Now, the Labour group have got a huge opportunity here today to apologise for their Leicestershire MPs, Jevon Sander and Amanda Hack, for putting their political aspirations before the welfare of their residents. So I'm happy to support the motion, and I hope colleagues across the floor will do so as well. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I now call on Mrs. Radford.
Thank you. Can I ask that we have a name vote on this item? I am very happy with the motion regarding the shameful action of the Labour government regarding the winter fuel payments. This will impact on support we currently give in encouraging our elderly residents. The adult department of county have worked hard in supporting them to live at home. This will make it even harder if they cannot afford to keep their heating on. It will impact on more of them going into hospital with illnesses brought on by being cold. The department, which has been working hard connecting care programme, is a partnership initiative which supports residents to live well as possible for as long as possible using remote technology to reduce avoidable hospital admissions. This will be of no good if they are freezing to death in their homes. Perhaps the Labour government want them to freeze to death, which will be less of a burden on them. I am pleased to announce that this programme has received a highly commended award in the Virtual or Remote Care Initiative of the Year category at the Health Service Journal Awards. It was also nominated in the Learning Disability Partnership of the Year category. Experience tells us that hospital settings can increase health problems. Therefore, we should be working hard to support our residents in staying in their own homes by keeping warm, not taking away the £300 allowance. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Mr. Bray.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman, and I'd like to thank my colleague for bringing this motion today. I think this is slightly it's not quite as straightforward as is being put forward. I think there could be some support for having a look at this benefit, and what I mean by that is a benefit of giving £300, where, as I understand it, for example, King Charles and Queen Camilla are entitled to this benefit at the moment to heat up Balmoral, and I'm sure that with some more thought, something could have worked a bit better on this. And there is no doubt about it. You know, there's no doubt about it that there was a mess left. You know, Mr. Smith says that there's a laugh. Well, the laugh came from the Conservative side, but I have to say my constituents are not laughing. My constituents haven't forgotten the Liz Truss experiment. I haven't forgotten Liz Truss when I'm paying £200 a month more on my mortgage following her than what I am now. So I think there is clearly an issue with the economy that needs to be addressed. But I do think that the way that the government have gone about this is the wrong move. And I say this because they are saying, and the government spokespeople, and if you listen to political podcasts like some of us do, are saying that if all the people that apply for the pension credits who are entitled to them sign up for the pension credits, then there actually won't be much of a real cash saving at all. So then that begs the question, is this a political stance rather than an economic stance, which really surprises me from a new Labour government. I think if the government had have come in and said, in 12 months' time we want to have a look at this, too late for this winter because people have set their budgets, people are relying on this, and I do believe, as has been said, there will be a choice made by some people of heating or eating, and then that is, potential has serious consequences. Inevitably, every winter you see tragic stories where somebody has died because they've not put their heating on. So this is going to play out really, really badly for the Labour government, and I would urge the Labour government to think again on this. If they had come forward and said, in 12 months' time, we want to have a look at changing to this universal benefit, to target it more to people who really need it, not necessarily people who... And I'm aware of people who say, oh, well, I spend it on my skiing holiday. I donate it to charity because I don't need it. There are very wealthy people who do not need this money. That is absolutely true. But if the government had come forward and looked at it in a targeted way to seek cross-party consensus to try and save this money, then I think that would have been a much better way of doing it, rather than coming in and making what seems to be a political stance. No, we need to cut this money for everybody now, because that is a really, really bad move in my view, and I'm really surprised and disappointed at the Labour Party for doing that. I think what I would say in conclusion is I would say to any pensioners watching this debate, I think I would offer them some advice, and I think I would say this: I think they need to take a leaf out of the Prime Minister's book, because you wouldn't catch him wasting his money on posh frocks for his wife, or wasting his money on designer new glasses, or trips to the cinema, or the theatre and all the rest of it. No. So a bit of a Mickey take aside. Please, Labour colleagues, if you do have contacts with the Labour MPs, please urge them to think again and look at something different and potentially come up with a better solution for perhaps next winter, because how it's being implemented now is a real disaster, and it's going to be really painful for a lot of people across Leicester and Leicestershire this winter. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next to speak is Mr. O'Shea, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I echo, strangely, Mr. Bray, because he's so right. The Prime Minister can take all the freebies he likes, going to watch Arsenal, going to watch Tottenham, having the dresses for his wife, the suits for himself, to parade himself before he was elected. But what he doesn't think is about the elderly people. Now, I might be over 66. I might be. I am. But the people of Leicestershire, the elderly people older than me that need that money, I think it's a disgrace, the way that he's done it. Yes, he could have reviewed it in a year, like Mr. Bray said, and I agree with him, but he's not. They've cut it. They've cut it across the whole country. People are struggling. People are struggling for the money at the present time. Cost of living is going up. We've got a position now where we've got the gas companies and the electric companies putting up another 10% in October. People will be turning off their electric and their heating and their gas and trying to keep warm in closing their house. We've seen it before, and we don't want to see it this winter. Please, Labour colleagues, I implore you to contact your MPs. Have a rethink about this. We are a society that should be looking after elderly people, not putting them in the dump.
Thank you. Next to speak is Mr. Merry, please.
Thank you, Chair. I don't get to say this in this chamber very often, but to our Lib Dem colleagues, thank you. I think it's a great motion, and we had a similar motion at North West Leicester District Council by the Lib Dem councillors there, and it was backed by the Conservatives. Unfortunately, every single Labour councillor abstained, so let's see what happens today. And obviously, people keep mentioning this 22 billion black hole. It seems to be the party line for the Labour. Let's see if they mention it again today. Mr Hunt's already mentioned it once. But I'd like to talk a little bit about the black hole, very quickly. It's dubious, and it's not my words. That's the words of Paul Johnson. Who's he, you may ask? He is the Senior Professor of Economics at the University College London. In an article last week for the Institute of Fiscal Studies, he said the black hole is dubious. He then went on to say, Labour knew the broad challenges in the Treasury numbers, but refused to confront them in either its manifesto or pre-election broadcasts. And the black hole is being added to by the public sector pay rises, round about £9 billion so far and rising. And that's just not a one-off payment, that's every year. When the government make a decision which has financial implications, major financial implications, they're supposed to do an impact assessment. And when the Prime Minister was asked by Rishi Sunak 3 times in PMQs, where is the impact assessment to do with the winter fuel allowance, he just shrugged his shoulders. They slipped it out last week, they didn't do one, and they're not going to do one. That is economic mismanagement. And it gets better. Lucy Powell, the leader of the House of Commons, went round the TV studios and had the audacity to say there would be a run on the pound if they didn't rob the pensioners, take the money off the pensioners for the winter fuel allowance. Truly, really bad economic management. And I know Councillor Smith's mentioned the new Labour MP for North West Leicestershire, but on the 29th of January, June of this year, she posted on Facebook a post about the election, and the last 2 lines were, I will always put people of North West Leicestershire first, and its people before politics. And then at a hustings in Ashby, all the candidates were asked a series of questions on integrity. And the question was, how can we trust you? And Amanda Hack's answer was, I will have a fully staffed office to access when needed, so someone will always be there to speak to them, accept and sort the problems out. So the first one's blown out of the water because she voted to cut the winter fuel allowance. So she didn't put the people first. And I've yet to see a fully staffed office so people can contact her. I've spoken to 25 residents in my village as a district councillor and assisted 14 of them in filling in the mammoth form. I don't know if anybody's tried to do it. It's truly gargantuan. And there's pages and pages of just rubbish to enable these people to try and rescue the winter fuel allowance. So, where is Amanda Hack? I don't know. She could be at Liverpool voting with her fellow trade union members who voted today to overturn the winter fuel allowance. Let's find out. So, finally, I'd just like to say, I think the residents of North West Leicestershire have lost the trust in their recently elected Labour MP. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Mr. King to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I echo some of the comments that others have already made, and I support this motion. But I wanted to address a couple of things I've heard since. Well, first of all, what we're talking about is very clear now, is this Labour government is intent on recreating the literal nanny state of everybody, from being a little child to being an old person, and interfering in our lives in every minutiae, from getting schools to supervise children brushing their teeth at school to now making pensioners and disabled people, which hasn't been mentioned in this debate, have a choice between whether they eat or heat. I was just going to talk about Market Harborough, Western Foxton. So according to the Office of National Statistics 2021 census, there were 3,337 residents aged over 65 living in my division. The government, the information we have suggests that around 93% of older people will lose their entitlement to winter fuel allowance. This means that over 3,100 pensioners in my division will lose this important top-up to help keep them warm during the winter weather. So that actually is about around £1 million, just under, which has been removed from the local economy of my division by the Labour government. I suppose when we look at the whole of Market Harborough, we could probably double that, looking at Mr Champion over there. So that's £2 million taken out of the local economy by the Labour government. A Labour government, the Prime Minister's first words were, "We're a government for growth." I think he must have missed a word there, anti-growth. And as I said, sadly, the choice of many will be between whether to eat or heat, to starve or freeze. I just want to make clear, I haven't attended a Taylor Swift concert. I haven't been invited to one. I haven't had the pleasure of watching Arsenal from a box, and I haven't had free glasses provided or clothes for me or my wife. But if you're it seems if you're a member of this national Labour government or a member of the cabinet nationally, getting freebies seems to be the order of the day. And I think the Leicestershire Labour Party needs to. The Leicestershire Labour Party, no, I'm not getting into that. The Leicestershire Labour Party really needs to think very carefully about its response, because there are hundreds of thousands of pensioners across Leicestershire who are going to have to make very difficult decisions this winter. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Dr. Filtham, please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. As has already been mentioned, I gather while we were having lunch up at Liverpool at the Labour Party conference, the unions all had a non-binding vote, sadly, but a vote totally against this rejection of the winter fuel payment. Just shows you, doesn't it? The paymasters of the Labour Party are actually against this here particular matter. However, looking back in time, because I've been around a long time, it's interesting to note that last time Labour had a large majority at the election, if you remember, in 1997, when Tony Blair became Prime Minister, one of the first things his Chancellor, Gordon Brown, did was introduce in his pre-budget statement the winter fuel payment. That was the first time it was introduced, to help older people meet the costs of heating their homes in winter. Has anything changed? Yes. Now, within days of Labour winning another majority at the election in July, the First Lady Chancellor in our history, Rachel Reeves, has decided to cancel the winter fuel payment for around 10 million pensioners, including myself. She made it clear that this was now a means-tested benefit, and those in receipt of pension credit would still receive their winter fuel payment. I've had a look at that because I've got a resident in my division that's just 87, and a widow, new widow. She lost her husband almost a year ago, and she didn't work full time, so I didn't get any pension from her husband's allowance. So she's now earning total pension that she gets is just under £600 a month. Right? Now, to qualify for pension credit, a single person must have a weekly income less than £218.15. She's just below that, so I thought, good. And she's got to have less than 10,000 savings. Actually, she has 10,500. So they take a load of money off for that. And I'm also told, I haven't tried, but she's gone to Citizens Advice to get help. The application form has, which has been mentioned, it was thick. It's 24 pages. You need to have probably a PhD to be able to fill that in. My own situation is I'm fortunate to be able to donate my winter fuel payment, and has done since I first had it, to local charities. So it's actually they who'll now lose out. I'll lose out, but I give it to them. So they're now going to lose out. I, of course, will fully support the motion today, and I hope everybody else does in this chamber. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'll call on Mr. Harrison to speak, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's always a problem coming late. A lot has been said. But the truth is, this is an absolutely disgusting Labour government to behave in the way they have, to treat citizens who are vulnerable. Some of these people would have fought in wars, worked hard all their lives to end up with this indignity that's been forced upon them. It's absolutely shocking to know this. Now, there's much been made about the 22 billion loss, gap hole. There's been questions asked and nobody can answer them. But if you know, and if anybody in the Labour group know what the budget is in this country, it's 1,200 billion. So 22 billion is roughly 2%. A serious gap. It's so hard to define when you're doing tight maths and sums and numbers. Things could be totally different. And I think they've always said, the Labour people, the pensioners, they always vote Tory. Well, I want to remind them this afternoon, as you've already been reminded, those people who are going to be suffering have got children, they've got grandchildren, they've got people who they know care for them. And how do you think that's going to go? Do you really think it's only going to be the pensioners who are going to turn against Labour? No, it won't be, because there's no justification in this. We've all been shocked and amazed at the way they can get their nose in the trough to help themselves, which they have done, without any consideration at all. And even the Prime Minister has said, well, I'll still continue taking bits there, and on it goes. Well, I think what they've done is really bad. I don't think there's any evidence to support this action other than a brutal decision made because that's what they think they want to do. But we also know they've been absolutely so generous to the people who pay their bills and support them, trade unionists. And look how many billions they're rolling over to give them. So, Mr. Chairman, I do support this motion, but I am angered. But when I look at the people that I represent, and some of them very old and in need of help, this is going to be a real blow. Some of us can sit back and say, well, £300. But in reality, when you drill down, there's going to be a lot of people suffering. Labour government did an analysis when we as a government looked and thought, no, we can't do that. They decided it was about 4,000 deaths that'd be occurring from that. Now, I think these are the realities that we're going to have to face. It is so serious because people are going to lose their lives and they're going to be our relatives or people that we know of. And I'd find that heartbreaking if I got a phone call to say they've now discovered a Mr. or Mrs. or whatever died in their home, no power on, nothing, just wrapped in blankets or jackets or coats, whatever they can do. So I thoroughly support this. I would urge the three Labour members, obviously the fourth one's not available, she's, they say, at a conference or keeping low, who knows. But I would urge you to think carefully about this, how you vote and handle it, because it is very, very serious. We've not had a discussion or a vote like this for a long time, and you've brought this to the forefront through your Prime Minister, making a very despicable, and I would say a spiteful action without real proper debate. He's just closing it down and closing it down. And the union have voted today, and they wanted to vote earlier in the week and had some momentum and power. Now it's just an observation. So it's down to the people themselves to respond. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Richardson, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure what I say next will shock my Labour colleagues, but I've actually been a trade union member for the past 51 years, and I wonder if my Labour colleagues can actually match that. And is it strange that today the trade unions put forward a motion that went through at conference to actually say how deplorable this decision was and how it should be reversed? But of course, they weren't allowed to actually address the MPs or the ministers because it was pushed, gerrymandered to a Wednesday afternoon when all the MPs have already left, which is rather puzzling, therefore, why the MP hasn't made it back to this room, because she certainly won't be in Liverpool, because they'll run away. So you have the trade unions saying this is wrong. Now, I know my three Labour colleagues over there are honourable people. In all the time I've been in this chamber, they have stood up and spoken eloquently to defend the poorest in our society, the most vulnerable. Now today, they have a chance to actually show they support the most vulnerable in our society and those most at risk by not sitting on their hands and abstaining, as I'm sure they probably want to do. But if they've got the courage and convictions, they should vote with us because it's the right thing to do. And I would urge our colleagues to do the right thing, to vote as you know you should, not just follow the party line, to prop up people who are already taking the mick. Now, I went to New York 15 years ago, and a hotel room in New York was more than £250 a night, and I certainly wasn't in the luxury penthouse. So I'm sure if the deputy leader actually put a right record in of how much she spent, there'd be plenty of money to pass on to pensioners. But coming back to the point, do the honourable thing. You know what you need to do, but of course I suspect you'll follow the party line. And on the final point about this mysterious 22 billion black hole, which no one has been able to explain, Rachel Reeves has not mentioned the 10 billion bonus she got the week before last, by the way in which gilts for quantitative easing are being redeemed. And that seems to have escaped her, that she's got 10 billion just dropped in her lap, which she fails to mention. But the real worry, and I don't know if anyone watched Newsnight last night, there was a minister on Newsnight last night, and do you know who they're going to put the blame on if anything happens and pensioners die? She said on Newsnight, and if you don't believe me, watch it, basically, there won't be a problem with pensioners because councils will be there to identify them and make sure nothing happens to them. So, in this room, they're already seeking to start blaming us if anything happens for the decision they made. So I'm sure our 3 Labour colleagues will vote with us, and I applaud them for doing so.
Thank you. That concludes my list of speakers. Mrs Taylor, you reserved your right.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Chairman. And
I'm sorry, Mrs Taylor, I'm getting some advice. Oh, I'm sorry. Mr Hunt, you weren't on my list, but I see you just raised your hand, so
I
speak.
thought you'd forgotten about us there in your new role. And by the way, I'll send our good wishes to the Chair this afternoon. It's quite a surprise, isn't it, to have a motion criticising government in this chamber. But how surprising is it to hear all these comments from Tory members who've suffered and are still suffering the defeat that they faced in July? And the reminder that you left this country in a complete economic mess. A complete economic mess.
Rubbish.
Not personally for you, and you probably voted for Liz Truss, and you probably would again if she was standing in the election. But for pensioners, for children in poverty, and for the economic prospects of this country, that £22 billion black hole was just in year this year, and it has to be dealt with. But the pattern of this previous government is that they promised, they didn't deliver, and they didn't account for what they were doing. Now, what we've heard is the sort of the easy, perhaps slightly childish, perhaps slightly Daily Mail arguments against the government that you didn't elect and are hurting you badly. But we are all adults in this room, and we are all coping with at least a £22 million deficit, and Lee knows what I'm talking about. And how are you going to deal with that? But it's not 22 million, it's still going up. And you know how you're going to deal with it. You're not going to deal with it by borrowing. You're going to deal with it in a few months' time by finding more savings to make in the budget. And you're doing it now, and we understand that because we're adults as well. So when the new government came into office, they were faced with a problem this year and a problem ongoing. One thing they could do immediately was in the in-year budget was to remove this particular allowance. And also they had to pay for the junior doctors who had already, yes, junior doctors to treat elderly people. And yes, the strike, the strike of the union doctors had already cost the country £1.6 billion unaccounted for. So what do we do when we're faced with a 22 million or greater deficit this budget? What we don't do is to raise in-year spending. What we don't do is to spend, is to borrow to finance revenue. What we have to do in this authority is to means test many of the services that we provide. And throughout the last 14 years, we've been inching bit by bit away at the services we offer, particularly in social care, but in other ways as well. And if you go to your districts, you'll find that they are replete with means tested. If you go onto the family hubs, you'll find information about means testing. If you go onto Contact Plus, does it still exist? That's means testing, again, that they'll tell you about. So what the government found it had to do was to implement this particular allowance as a means test. That's not anything foreign, it's what we do day after day after day in this council. Now, as far as elderly people and state pensioners like myself are concerned, state pensions have risen substantially in the last year, and Labour will continue the triple lock into the next year, and that's going to be worth about, I think, £450,000 per pensioner. The government has also delivered £150 warm home discounts. And we will also be participating in an increase in household support fund of 4.21 million nationally. And the Labour government is absolutely determined to do everything possible to protect pensioners, which is why we are supporting the motion, where it says that there will be a new thrust on the uptake of pension credit. The last time there was a campaign for pension credit was over 10 years ago by the Tory government. I think the people like myself who are pensioners now are probably in their 50s. So there's never been, under the Tories, a campaign to increase the take-up of pension credit. And so to that extent, we support the age concern part of the motion. But we cannot vote against practice of means testing, which this council acts on day after day for services and benefits that it distributes. And if you think you can't do that, then you don't understand how this council works.
Thank you. My list is growing. Mr. Grimley is the next to speak.
Thank you, Chair. We talk about difficult decisions. We had to take, or the government had to take a lot of difficult decisions 14 years ago when the Labour Party left the public finances in such a mess that the Chief Secretary to Treasurer had to admit that they'd spent all the money and there's nothing left. And that was a difficult, there had to be difficult decisions. And to be fair, the Lib Dem party joined us in a coalition. And one of the things that we didn't actually hit was the pensioners' winter fuel payment. But going sort of off that and into the here and now. Age UK, which I do speak to quite a lot and do speak with the chairman as well, have said that one of the big problems with means testing pensioners, the big problem they've had before, is that pensioners are too proud to be, a lot of pensioners are too proud to be mean tested. They don't want to fill in the forms, they don't want to get caught into the social care system because they're scared, to be quite honest with you. They don't want to be, have to, you know, it's a pride, it's a generational thing, and that's it. So I do understand that there are people who can afford it and can afford this, which is pensioners that, you know, don't need the money. A lot do give those to charities, and a lot of local charities, including food banks, will be losing that. So I'll be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I've now seen Mr. Mear wishes to speak. Mr. Mear, please.
But there are some things that I need to come back on, and it's not fair, and you've pointed out numerous times about national government making tough decisions. Mr Grimley actually said when they were in power, and Conservatives along with the Liberals were in power, they made tough decisions. You know, remember the bedroom tax, remember the child benefit cap, all the rest of it so there were tough decisions that were made by the party opposite.
Point of order, Mr Chairman. This myth, there was never a bedroom tax. There was a reduction in benefits, and a reduction in benefits cannot be constituted as a tax. So I would politely ask Mr Mear to withdraw that slur.
I will take advice rather than reprimand afterwards.
I think there's been so much slur going around from the other party opposite. It bemuses me that you stand up.
I'm advised Mr Mear may continue.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. So there was lots. And remember, this is a new government, 3 months in. The reason is because you lot lost so heavily in the previous election, massively so. And congratulations to our Liberal Democrat colleagues as well, who won positively. But I'm disappointed that you brought the motion forward. However, this is something that was in June. And I didn't see any motion in full council. I didn't see any debate about it in full council. Pensioners are the only group to benefit from the radical changes to the welfare system made by the Tories over the last decade, while working-age families are losing out by thousands of pounds every year, according to a report by the Resolution Foundation. And it goes on to list, colleagues, other people have quoted from different sources as well. Please don't laugh when I quote factual information to you. So, for example, families have lost by up to £4,600 per year. So it's one of those where it's a balancing act. You know, we have to balance the books. Where do we look for the money? You know, so we've said we're going to mean test. So it's people, and there's 25 members here who declared an interest that they received the winter fuel allowance. If I'm correct, it might be a little bit lower by one, or a little bit higher by one more, but half the council receives a winter fuel allowance. You can understand now why they had a look at it and think, actually, if we're going to have a £22 billion gap, here's potentially a saving where we could make it. Also about the application form, actually, I think we've just inherited that system that was in place already. And if it's 24 pages long, it's 24 pages long because you've left it 24 pages long. So you were the party in power when you made that application form so complicated for pensioners. So if it's 20, but the problem is if you can blame Gordon Brown, but it was.
Mr. Mear,
it was in 2010.
Mr. Mear, excuse me.
Sorry,
could you
Chairman.
address your remarks?
Yeah,
to
so
the chair, please?
it's complicated. So yes, we may look at that one. We may refresh it. We want to make it easier for people to look at. It's very difficult to sit here. I've been at conference and see you berate one of our colleagues who fantastically won a result, and she's won a great result. She's at party conference. It's where she should be. Unfortunately, she's given her apologies like other councillors do when they're not here as well. So it's just one of those things. It's unfortunate she's not here. But if should she be here, she'd be saying the same. There's tough choices we've made in government. We've got a £22 billion black hole to fill. We need to start on it now. Otherwise, and everybody keeps on forgetting this, somebody mentioned about the £10 billion windfall potentially. But actually, if you read the news headlines, we're 100% of GDP is our national debt. And that was announced this week, 100% of it. So we've got to get a grip on this, and this is where it starts. And it's unfortunate that's the topic that you've chosen, for example, to bat the government back on. There'll be more tough decisions, but there'll also be positives as well. Somebody mentioned the breakfast club, and they mentioned it in a derogatory way. Actually, I want children to be able to go to school in a full stomach. And if that means that they get a better education, and so be it. But that policy has already been rolled out, and we've rolled it out nationally. We're not saying that the winter fuel allowance shouldn't be wiped out. It's not. It's going to be means tested. So those who actually need it will receive it. And I think everybody's lost that point in this debate. Thank you.
Thank you. I now have seen 3 more speakers. So the next to speak is Mrs. Richardson, please.
Thank you. I've been listening to the debate, and I think we have to get back to basics. The government has put in a system that hits a lot of vulnerable people, full stop. It wouldn't matter who was in government, but it happens to be the Labour government. Amanda Hack was congratulated at the start of this meeting for becoming an MP. Why people are so upset with her is that she's voted for this. She's an MP, she has to take that flack, just the same as we do with our council work. This council has always done its very best to support all the vulnerable in our care. We need to have a government that does the same. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Mrs. Page to speak, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I have listened to this debate, and I don't really think I wish to add a lot, except my extreme disappointment. When Labour was voted into power, I thought, well, good luck, a socialist government that will look after the vulnerable, and they might even tax the big earners like the gas, the electricity. Maybe they even nationalise them, that we all benefit from the income of maybe extra taxation. But no, instead of going after the big companies that are creating additional cost and additional burden on the vulnerables, they are left alone. And here we are, pensioners not only losing their winter fuel payment, but they're also facing an increase in the cost of fuel, gas, electricity. And I think that is my main disappointment, that the Labour Party isn't true to their own conviction and their own roots. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Mr. Ashman to speak, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I wasn't going to say anything, but I will make two points. First is, when Gordon Brown brought in this policy, he was specific about it not being means tested. He said it was wrong to means test pensioners for this. This should be universal. Wealthier pensioners pay tax, and a lot of them, as my colleague has said, give away the money. The second thing, which is totally disingenuous, is to talk about the increase in pensions as being an increase in pensions. It isn't. It's based on the triple lock, which is to make up for inflation and for the cost of living. So what it does is make sure that pensions remain around the same level and don't fall back as they have behind. So it is totally wrong to say that. I think it's a mean-spirited policy, and I think Labour will pay the price. But I do take my hat off for you, because I know how difficult it is sometimes supporting a policy that you don't agree with. We've all done it, so well done, Max.
Thank you. That is the end of my current list. I'll now look round carefully for any more indications. As the auctioneers say, fair warning. No more indications. So, Mrs. Taylor, please, you reserved your right.
I'll try again. Thank you very much. I think just to answer the Labour group here, I mean,
what we do well at this council and have always done well at this council under the Conservative group is to protect our most vulnerable residents, unlike the government who seem to attack the most vulnerable. So we need to make that clear. I just want to say thank you to the Lib Dem groups for sharing this motion with us. I think our motion crossed in the post, so to say. So I'm really grateful that they decided to share this, and we do work well at this council when it's a really important position. So, as been mentioned already, the unions have just voted against the removal of the winter fuel allowance at the Labour conference, and I think that will be one of the legacies of that conference, along with the freebies, the clothes, the glasses, the tickets, and also, obviously, sausages. So everyone that I've spoken to and every organisation I've spoken to agree that this is the wrong decision. The Labour Party have picked on the wrong group of people. We all love our pensioners and we are very upset by this decision. It's a very ill thought out policy. Once our pensioners on a very fixed salary literally burn through their savings, they will be cold. They become ill. They'll be admitted to hospital, which then costs more money. Then possibly they'll have to move to a care home, where the state will have to pay for them to be in the care home because they have no savings left. So it just seems very ill thought out. And I always stand by the mantra that prevention is better than cure. Keeping pensioners warm in winter is far better than being cold, being ill, being admitted to hospital, ending up in a care home, which is more burden on the government and the local authorities. So we will fight, and we will continue fighting to keep our pensioners warm this winter. And I will be supporting this motion.
Thank you. I now call on Mr. Mullaney, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to everyone who has spoken in the debate. I would just reiterate the fact that many pensioners risk losing out on winter fuel payments that they need, including disabled pensioners who often have extra costs in terms of energy costs. So that's a group in particular that risks losing out. The winter fuel payment was, as we know, brought in by Labour under Gordon Brown. I think at the time William Hague and the Conservatives opposed it initially, so I think we've sort of come full circle here now in terms of Labour abolishing it and Conservatives wanting to keep it, but we can agree with that. I think that the Labour Party has got a challenging thing to do in government. I know we've heard a lot of the criticisms on the freebies and so on. I think, let's not forget the previous 14 years and Boris Johnson's wallpaper and weddings and Owen Paterson and the Blackpool MP who had to resign over the gambling money. So let's just be honest that, the last government wasn't exactly perfect, which was one of the reasons why people threw it out so resolutely in July. But I would at least welcome the fact that the Conservatives on this occasion are in agreement on this issue. I think that one of the biggest causes of mistakes in life and in politics is overcompensation. You make a mistake and then you overgo the other direction. And I think one of the problems with Labour in the past was they come under a lot of attacks from the Conservative Party, from the Conservative press, for allegedly not being careful enough with the nation's money, which has now meant that they've become really hypersensitive on this issue. And even though it's been pointed out to them, the damage that this winter fuel payment cut will make, they feel they have to stick to it in order to make some point about the fact that they're very careful with the nation's money, even though it means lots of people are going to lose out because of it. In terms of means testing winter fuel payments, I don't think there's necessarily an objection to means testing winter fuel payments. As people have said, some of the very super rich who get the means tested, who get the winter fuel payments, the billionaires, the super rich businessmen, they don't need it. So there is a case for means testing. The problem is that the means test that has been applied, the pension credit, is too narrow a means test. If 92.5% of pensioners are going to lose their winter fuel payment in Leicestershire, that is too narrow a means test, too restrictive, too harsh and cruel a means test. And therefore they should be looking at widening the amount of people that are eligible for it And to be fair to the party opposite, when they were in government and they brought in the cost of living payments, I think they were targeted at something like A to D bans in council tax. That would at least, if a system like that was brought in instead of pension credit, it would at least mean that more people on low incomes, pensioners, would be receiving the winter fuel payment. So thank you for everyone for their comments today. I hope we can support this motion, and I do hope sincerely that the Labour Party think again about this, understand that it's the right thing to do to change the policy on this and to ensure that more pensioners who need the pension credit do receive it.
Thank you. We can now proceed to a vote. 5 members or more did stand up earlier on. I'm advised that for a relevant point for a recorded vote, well, I needn't go on, need I? Clearly, members are now standing up when I call for the vote, so that fulfills the constitutional requirements. So, we'll now proceed to a recorded vote.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. As 5 members have stood, in accordance with Standing Order 28.5, we'll conduct a recorded vote, so I'll read your names out and ask you to indicate if you wish to vote for or against the motion moved by Mr Mullaney and seconded by Mrs Taylor, or whether you wish to abstain. Mr Allen.
Absolutely for.
Mr Ashman.
For.
Mr Bannister. Mr Barclay.
For.
Mr Bedford. Mr Bill. Mr Bolter. Mr Bray. Mr Brecon. Mrs Broadley. Mr Champion. Mr Chapman. Mr Charlesworth. Mr Coxon. Dr Feltham. Mr Frisbee.
For.
Mrs Fryer. Mr Galton. Mr Gamble. Mr Gattaraya. Mr Gillard. Mr Grimley. Mrs Hack. Mr Hadji Nicolaou. Mr Harrison. Mr Harrison Rushton. Mr Hills. Mr Hunt. Mrs Jordan. Mr King. Mr Lovegrove. Mr Merry. Mr Mia. Mr Morgan. Mr Mullaney. Miss Newton. Mr O'Shea. Mr Orson. Mrs Page. Mr Payne. Mr Parton. Mr Pendleton. Mr Fillimore. Mr Poland. Mrs Posnett. For. Mrs Radford. Mr Richardson. Mrs Richardson. Mr Rushton. Mrs Seaton. Mr Shepherd.
For.
Mr Smith. Mrs Taylor. Mr Walker. Mrs Wright. Thank you.
To be advised of the formal numbers. The motion is carried by 41 to 3 abstentions. I think that concludes today's business, so the meeting is now concluded. Thank you.